Hello there, everybody. Just before we start with this episode, if you don't mind leaving a like on this video, if you're watching this on YouTube, make sure you subscribe to the channel. If you haven't done so already, thank you so much for 850 plus subs, in which we hit the other day. Your support, we really do appreciate it. And of course, make sure you download the podcast wherever you get your podcasts from, whether that's Spotify and Apple or any other providers. Again, it's just one of those where I'm so confused with what we actually do, but any support will be hugely appreciated. And let's get on with today's episode. So welcome back to 40 Fever, guys. I hope you all are doing well. As you can see, in terms of the other hosts, I'm solo tonight. We should have been joined by Jake, but he's been called into work very last minute. So we probably could have had Salford as part of this discussion because they're not entirely out of this promotion/playoff race themselves if they get a few results together. But it seems more unlikely for them. But we are joined by a guest for another one of these specials. I'm not sure if it'll probably be the full hour long, but we're pleased to be joined by Daniel, who is a Doncaster Rovers supporter. Daniel, how's everything over in sunny Doncaster?
Yeah, it's good, thanks. Other than the last-minute equaliser, but other than that, we're going well.
Good stuff. We'll start on last night. Obviously you were playing Walsall. 2-2 it finished. Obviously, Walsall dropping more points and not in the best of form at the minute. As for Doncaster, sort of late-ish equaliser from Billy Sharp, still kicking around and scoring those goals. But you touched on the result a little bit there. What's sort of like your overriding emotions for that? Because obviously, if you were to win that, you could have been 2 points behind. You could have been a point behind Walsall, which seems mad to think probably a couple of months ago.
Yeah, we lost there on Boxing Day, and I think at that point, I think it was something like 12 points. We were behind, and obviously we felt like we were miles behind them, and they were firing on all cylinders then. But I mean, to be fair, I was quite impressed with them last night. I was hopeful they would look like an out of form team, but they're one of the few teams that have actually come and sort of took us on in a sort of end-to-end sort of game, and it made for quite a good spectacle. We probably scored the first goal against a run of play. They equalised straight afterwards, and then it probably looked like it was sort of petering out to one each, but I think it's their style. You're always a bit fearful on the break because we were trying to chuck everything forward, and they had Matt and Amanchi, and they were sort of not afraid to go direct, and we struggled a bit against that with a makeshift defence. So I was actually quite fearful they might nick a late goal. So when we actually scored, I thought, well, maybe we can go on and win. But it did feel like one of those games where one team scores and the other one sort of hits back, which, like I say, we're probably kicking ourselves in a way we didn't hang on. But I think if we're being totally honest, I don't think we probably did enough to win overall. And I know at that stage where you just need to get results, but I don't actually have too many issues when the opposition come to try to make a game of it. And, you couldn't really say they didn't deserve something. So although it would have been good to win, we lost at Bromley the other week where I think they had one shot on target and we had 35 shots and we lost 1-0. I think it's those games actually that come back to haunt you, not the good games and the hard fought battles that can go either way. But it was a shame in a way, but we're still very much in the mix. And I think although you feel those games against those around you are the most important, obviously every game's worth 3 points, and we go to Cheltenham on Saturday and we need to win there. We could have won last night, and then you lose the next game and you're back to where you were. So I think you just got to take every point you can and try to be positive and just see how many we can get between now and the end of the season.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, you say you've got Cheltenham next. Maybe, they've gone and lost to obviously Tranmere recently, and then last night to Morecambe. So they've lost to 2 of the bottom 3 teams. So I'm not sure if that's, maybe an advantage or that could be potentially dangerous. I think you could probably see it as a couple. But I've always said that Walsall are, a bit weird. They've clearly been efficient of what they can do. I get your point with, they look dangerous on the break, and I agree. That's where they scored their only goal when Grimsby beat them 3-1 about a month ago now. But you can see that they've got real quality there. But I don't know, is it? It's probably a yes, but would you probably have taken a result last night, even though taking like Walsall's like recent form into account as well? Because ultimately, you're still playing the league leaders, aren't you?
Yeah, it's a difficult one because I think it's whenever you're playing a team around you, obviously you don't want to lose. But I think, to be fair, with Grant McCann in charge, we do try to win every game, and that's probably our downfall at times, where we do try to attack. And there's been certain games this season where, like the 2 games against Bromley, we've lost 1-0 in each game, but we had about 30 odd shots in each game. But I think if we'd have set out to draw 0-0, I don't think we'd have possibly lost the game, if that makes sense. So we we do go out to attack, but it's one of those. I'd say before the game, I wouldn't have said I'd take a point, but I think in each game, as it pans out, you have to play the game you're in and not the one you want to be in. And I think, to be fair, it felt like a draw was a fair result. And sometimes in those sort of games, you can easily lose because you're going for the win. Obviously, last night kind of went in our favour because we got ahead again. But I think it'd have felt much worse to me had we lost, say, 2-1 in the last minute. So at least, like you say, I know games are running out, but I think we're still at the stage where I know there's a load of cliches, and I think I saw like killer blow and everything like that, but I don't think we're at that point yet. We're still, we've got a game in hand. We're still, like, if we win that, we'd be in the top 3. So we've had this run of games where we've played, like I say, Cheltenham's a bit of an anomaly, but we've had Crewe, obviously last night. We've then got Wimbledon, we've got Salford, we've got Colchester, Bradford, Notts County. So we've got all those teams around us. And to me, it only becomes must win when it is must win. So if we go to Notts County on the last day and we have to win, then it becomes must win. So I thought, overall, you could see how Walsall are what they are. I think they're really well organised, solid. They've got a really clear sort of shape. Everyone knows their roles. And obviously up to Christmas, they had that bit of magic in low. Now they haven't got that, but they've still got the foundation. So I think they're still really difficult to beat, even without his goals. But if you add, it's a bit like us with Molineux. If he's on form, he gives you the edge in those sort of close games. But no, I was actually surprised at how good Walsall were, because I thought they might come and lack confidence, but they didn't appear to.
Yeah, that's an interesting one, that, and it's good to get your thoughts on that. Let's go back to the start of the season. Obviously, you had that monstrous run, obviously last season to get yourself into the playoffs, falling short to Crewe Alexandra on penalties. I remember watching that game, and obviously the scenes, after the shootout over from the away end with the Crewe fans invading the pitch, must have been one that stung. But I remember obviously reading, it might have been after the game, that for what Grant McCann said, that if there's no one serious in this squad, that if there's no one that is serious about getting promotion this year, then they're not going to be a part of his team. And that was something that it was quite hard hitting, but also it was one in which he was signalling his intent straight away. And you look at the business over the summer, bringing back players like Billy Sharp and Jordan Gibson was a smart signing, keeping hold of someone like Luke Molineux, and obviously bringing in Harry Clifton from us, of course, long term Mariner, making the switch over was an interesting move at the time, but I think it was probably time for him to move on. But you know what you were going to get with Harry, someone who was going to run through brick walls and everything like that. I'm assuming that you sort of saw the same alignment with Grant McCann, with the with his intent going into the start of the season, and you see that the players that you already had in your squad, as well as the players that were brought in, I personally got the sense that there's players there that are very much capable for a promotion push. I'm not sure if that was something that you thought at the time.
Yeah, I think, to be fair, last season we obviously struggled for the majority. We went on that unbelievable run and we ended up coming fifth. So I think, yeah, the back of my mind, I'm thinking we came fifth, having probably had 3/4 of the season where we were pretty bad, if that makes sense. So I thought there's no reason why we shouldn't sort of be there or thereabouts based on, like you say, we kept most of the squad together and so on. But I think one thing I would say, and I totally understand it because you have to go on what the manager says, but I think fans have taken it literally when McCann said we want to win the title, and it's, I mean, how else can you take it? Because that's how he said it. But I think, you know, I'm 40 in May, so I've followed for a long time, and I think those sort of statements can come back to bite you a little bit because once you say that, everyone then has that expectation. Whereas I think on the run last year, although at the start we felt like we might be okay, we'd had a couple of years of turmoil, and there wasn't any expectation going into those last few games. I just thought we're going to lose one at some point, and that'll be the end of the season because we couldn't afford one slip. But the moment we sort of fell into the playoffs was the moment the season finished. So I thought that with Colchester recently, they've been on such a good run. But as soon as you get in them playoffs, they've just gone out of form again. And I don't think that's coincidence. I think it takes an effort to get somewhere. So if we'd have had another 3 games at the end of last year, we might well have dropped back out because we'd almost hit the heights. And I think maybe that's what happened in the playoffs, that it was just maybe one game too far. And that might have been the final, even if we'd have got through the second leg. But it certainly feels more geared up to be successful now. But I think, yeah, we're still judging ourselves on that run and what McCann said, which I just think it's, we've probably been a bit harsh on ourselves. I think we'd had sort of 2.5 years where we lost about 2/3 of our games. It looked like we were heading back to the conference, let's be honest, the way we were going. And now we're not moaning, but there's this expectation. So people are almost like last night, oh, we've chucked away 2 points, rather than if we win the game in hand, we're in the top three. So I still think we've got these sort of almost lofty expectations. But I think, having said that, it's kind of our own fault because we've set our high targets. But I've no issue with having high standards and targets. It's just sometimes if you don't quite meet them, it feels a little bit worse than it is. But I actually disagree with most people and think if we were to go into the playoffs, which obviously we don't really want, but I do think we'd be better equipped than last year, where although we had the momentum behind us, we'd had 10 wins on the spin and a draw. But up to that point, we'd almost looked like relegation candidates. So just because we had that momentum, there wasn't really anything to back it up other than the fact that we were going well at the time. Whereas I think this year, again, people have bemoaned a bit of a lack of consistency, but our home record's virtually identical to away. I think we've won 10 at home, 9 away. The goal difference has been pretty steady, home and away. We've drawn about the same amount. So actually, the records have been pretty similar. We've had little runs of good results and bad. So although that looks inconsistent, I think overall, every time I've looked at the table, we've been sort of on the verge of the top three. So I think the slightly frustrating thing is every time we've had that opportunity to take a big step forward, like last night, we haven't quite took it. But every time it looks like we might take a step back, we've managed to take another one forward. So we're just, it feels like we're so close. But McCann has said, I think he was getting a bit irritated by people feeding his words back to him when we weren't doing so well. Judge it after 46 games. And I think last night somebody said, made a comment, and I was like, I don't think we're quite there yet. And it's like, well, how long are you giving it? And it's like, well, I would give it the 46 games. I would judge it in 7 games' time, because if we get a decent points haul out of this last 7, I think we will be in the top 3, just because we're playing Bradford, Wimbledon, still to come, Notts County. You know, if we won those 3 games, there's every chance we'll be in the top 3, because them 3 wins are worth 6 wins in the context of what we've got to come. So I don't think we're going to need to win 5 or 6 out of 7, like's being predicted. And I think, having experienced a lot of these sort of seasons before, it's there's no saying about the value of one, and like last night, that 1 point might be the difference. If we sit at the end and we're 2 points short, everyone can come back to me and say, "No, that was the game where we dropped 2 points and that cost us." But it might be the 1 point that gets us closer. So I think until we get to the end of the season, it's those games. I've already mentioned them against Bromley. We lost to Harrogate early on. We lost at Newport early on. It's them sort of games to me, which have been the costly ones, where we've played teams with the greatest respect, with, a huge will to win, but not a huge amount of skill necessarily, and that will beat the skill, and they're the frustrating ones for me, where we've gone into games and perhaps been out battled, out fought a little bit, and there's no divine right to win any game, but I think there are certain traits in them games that you need to have. Whereas last night we had those battling qualities against a team that battled. So I think you have to get to the end, and unfortunately, like most things in life, when it's too late, that's the point you'll know where you went wrong. But I think we've still got to secure that place in the top 7. I think up until recently, we were 1-0 down at Crewe, and the gap to the playoffs, I think at that point, was going to be 3 points. It's like we're not actually securing the top 7 yet. So again, I know the narrative's been on the top 3, but you've still got to secure, to me, make sure you're in the 7, then you've got a free hit to go ahead. So maybe we've looked ahead a little bit too much. I'm a bit more, judge it game by game at your peril, if you like, and just see where we are at the end. If we come up just short, then we come up just short, and then that's probably what you deserve. But if we get in the top 3, we'll have deserved it, because we'll have navigated this difficult end to the season. So I suppose it's pay your money and take your choice, really.
Yeah, exactly. And it'll be an interesting watch between now and then, because obviously you're only 3 points behind, well, sort of both Port Vale and Bradford in those automatic spots. But as you mentioned, I mean, Grimsby in 7th, we're only 5 points off you. So there's not a hell of a lot in it. And even then, I mean, look, even if Notts were to win tonight, they'll go above you. It's just ridiculous, isn't it, with how tight it is? I just see it as a case of just one defeat, could be costly, and you could be sliding down at least. That's just the nature of it at the minute. I mean, Walsall, if they don't get their act together pretty quickly, are at risk of not just dropping out of top spot, potentially dropping out of the top 3 altogether, which will be quite interesting, because they've been there pretty much all season. But that's just sort of the nature of the beast in that sort of way. But it was quite interesting what you mentioned about obviously going into last season. I remember looking at the game that we played in like mid-February. That should have been our relegation 6-pointer, and you come and beat us 5-1. That just don't talk to me about that one, because that was such a horrible day. I've seen 2 5-1 defeats at home to Doncaster in the space of 10 years. Just stop battering us at home. I mean, we only lost by the 3 this season, so there's progress. There's progress there. So it did feel quite nice when we did beat you. A couple months ago now. Just looking at obviously some of the games that you have played throughout the season, is there any there in which were probably were good wins sort of see, or was there any team in there in which you've played that you think, right, hold on, these are actually these looked quite good against us? Because I'm looking at the league this season. Out of the teams that, let's say, Grimsby have played, I'm struggling to pick out many standouts actually. So I'm not sure what your thoughts are with that.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not just saying this, but obviously, like the way you came to our place, because there was a lot that day of how poor we were. But I thought, again, to be fair, I thought you played in a way that made us look poor. I don't think it was us necessarily being that bad. I just think, you battled so hard. you won those individual battles early on, and then you played some good football. And it was like at the end, it's like like you say, I'm the worst loser in the world, but I can hold my hands up at the end of that game and say the better team won. Like last night, we played a decent. Like I don't actually mind those sort of games. It's the ones where you lose, where you think the opposition have come really for 0-0 and they end up winning 1-0. And you think, how have we managed to lose that? But yeah, like we went to Bradford and Port Vale and won both games. And again, I mean, to be fair, we did play well in both games, but I thought they were both really poor in those games. But then, like we played Port Vale in the flip, they beat us a bit like the games we played against Grimsby. They've gone. There's not been many teams towards the top where we've had two similar results, if that makes sense. Like a lot of our doubles, like Accrington, Morecambe, Gillingham, trying to think a few more. They've all been those teams. Fleetwood, although they picked up a bit recently, like we played them twice around Christmas, and they were terrible in both games. It was around where they changed the manager. But yeah, like you say, it's weird. Like we copped 2 beatings against Chesterfield, and they're on a bit of a run now, actually. But again, I think we underestimate. You know, in this division, there isn't a huge amount of local games. Probably like when we play yourselves. It's sometimes that sort of, you know, although they're not out and out derbies, like Chesterfield undoubtedly raised their game against us in both games. I've seen, you know, with the Red Button deal, I've seen quite a bit of them, and I don't know. You can sometimes just cop teams on the day, but I've seen them a few times where they haven't looked like scoring at all, and then in both of those games, it was like 3 and 5. I think we lost 5 with. I think they had 6 shots on target. And after the game, obviously they're sort of crowing about it, but I'm thinking, well, I think they lost 5 out of 6 around that. So you're thinking one 5-2 win and 5 defeats that's going to cost them if they don't get in the playoffs, for example. But I understand the narrative because obviously they beat us and they wanted to rub it in. But I'm thinking, if you played, with all due respect, if you played like you did against us, against the bottom half of the table, I can't believe you wouldn't beat most of them. But then the next game, I think they went and lost. Was it to Harrogate or someone? You're thinking, well, don't get me wrong, Harrogate are not a bad side on the day, but you're thinking if you produce anything like, and that's probably been the frustration with our own form. Like we've been to Port Vale and Bradford and won, and then in some other games we haven't. But like you say, you try and call it as you see it, and probably like recently, Swindon are probably one of the better teams we've played, and they've probably been the form team since Holloway went in there. But like you say, sometimes you look at the table and think, you know, Carlisle for half an hour on Saturday, you know, you just said we look like the team at the bottom, but then as soon as we scored, they sort of folded like a pack of cards, and you think, well, that's why they're down there. But I probably would say overall, over the 2 games, having watched most games, Walsall have probably been I don't know if best is the right word, but certainly the hardest opposition we've played. I think just in the manner, they don't give you a second. They're clever with the way they're sort of, you know, they have the sitter in midfield, the other 2 close out wide, the the wing backs sort of get up and down, the outside centre backs get forward. They're almost the most attacking players. They remind me a little bit of that Chris Wilder Sheffield United side, not obviously on the same level, but and I think when you added Lowe into that, they had the star. I think if he'd have stayed, they'd probably be 20 points clear by now. Without that, they're more of a leveler because they're like a lot of other teams in the division probably. But I think they over the 2 games, they probably give us the toughest double, if you like. Although Chesterfield battered us twice, to be fair. But I do think they would. But it can't be a one-off twice. But you know what I mean. If you look at their overall, like their home record, I think it was only about their 5th win at home. And you're thinking, well, how have you not won more? Do you know what I mean? So, but yeah, a lot of games have just been. I think it's interesting. I've watched a lot more of League Two this season because of the TV deal, but a lot of games are very similar, where you think you can't really tell the difference between both teams. Whoever gets the first goal doesn't tend to lose, and I've lost count of the amount of like 1-1s I've seen. Like you're the exception, but
yeah, we don't do draws, so it's quite difficult with us.
1-1s, 1 goal in it, and quite a lot of random games where teams are 2-0 up and the opposition score 2 late goals, and they haven't looked like scoring necessarily. And then, like I think Wimbledon, the classic, I've watched them 2 or 3 times where they've either been 2-0 up or 2-0 down with a couple of minutes to go, and it's finished 2 each. And was it Barra they played? Like Barra hadn't.
Yeah.
I think they made it 2-0 with about 5 minutes to go, and you thought, well, that's that now. And then, like within 2 minutes, it was 2 each, and you thought, well, Barra hadn't even really mustered an attack in the second half. But I know sometimes 2-0 can be a dangerous score. But yeah, there haven't been many teams that I've thought I've watched consistently, and I think that is the nature of it. Last season there were 3 outstanding teams, and MK Dons were a really good 4th, and we finished 5th. I mean, our average position must have been 5th from bottom last season, yet we finished 5th. Whereas this year, it has felt a bit like Walsall and the rest. But even now, they might drop out right at the crucial moment, or there might be just these draws they're getting, they're just edging them closer. But I did think Bradford up to a few weeks ago. But since I've thought that, they've had some terrible results. Just again, at the point where you thought they might kick on. Again, I think they battered Colchester, who were in form, then lost at home to Tranmere, who I think they've won 1 away game in about 2 seasons, haven't they? You're thinking whether that's just the nature of the league, but I think they've lost, is it 4 out of 5 now, or something like that? Bradford,
they lost to Gillingham before that as well, who have not been great this season at all, with the expectation of them coming into the season as well. So yeah, they've had a few issues. Obviously losing to Port Vale last night, what was a big game. But there's a couple there.
Yeah, Port Vale are another, aren't they? They have some like they don't score at home against anyone who sets up with everyone behind the ball, but then they'll beat Bradford. But maybe you can see that because Bradford will go and, like Walsall last night, they'd have lost because they tried to win, if you like, rather than. Again, there was a few comments that they were quite negative, but I disagree. I thought they were quite. They weren't all out attack, but they picked their moments when to go forward, and they looked threatening. But when you play those teams that really don't set out to score, you seem to manage to go 1-0 down to them somehow, and then it makes it even worse. But yeah, Port Vale are a really odd team. You look at them and think probably like a few. Every time they've looked like kicking on, they've just had a bad result, and it sort of dropped you back into the pack. So I think it is going to be like Wimbledon. I thought they might go on, and then they conceded 5 goals in the last 2 minutes in the last 3 games, haven't they? Which it's almost like going to be when the wheel stops spinning, whoever's in that top 3 is going to go up, I think, which is slightly frustrating because I think we probably had a good chance to secure and cement a top 3 spot, but I think there'll be 6 or 7 other clubs thinking the same, to be honest.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. I mean, I'm just looking at some of these teams. I mean, you've mentioned Port Vale. Something I have noticed about Port Vale, last few weeks in particular, is the amount of late goals they've scored. And it's picked up some big points along the way. 4 wins out of their last 5 for them. But I have to say, I thought Port Vale were one of the poorer teams we've played this season. We beat them 3-0 at Blundell Park, and I didn't think much of them at all. They were pretty quiet. It might have been down to maybe our style as well. I think Bradford, certainly at their place, were one of the better teams we've played for, not just this season, quite a bit. And that was like right at the start of January. Sort of like the start-ish of their really good run at home. I thought they were one of the best teams we played for quite a bit. The way they moved the ball about, the way they were well drilled, well set up, and the way they hit us. And that was I think they lost Andy Cook the game before that. I think they played Barrow before that. And obviously there was a lot of question marks whether, obviously about Andy Cook, what are Bradford going to do? And, they dominate us, to quite frank. But yeah, I look at some of those teams. I mean, Notts did a double over us, but I didn't think they were all that. It was quite hard to tell in the game that we went there, because there was quite a couple of dodgy goals that should have been prevented from not just ourselves but from the referee. Walsall, yeah, I mean, they beat us 4-1 at home, but I didn't think they were that convincing. Certainly at their place when we beat them the other week, certainly not. AFC Wimbledon, we beat them 1-0. Then, yeah, they're again just not convinced. There's a lot of teams in there. I just think, we're not convincing, but I think it's just that's just where we are. I think this season, in terms of quality, I mean, you look at, I think you sort of had the idea of last year with the teams they had, because you had Wrexham, Stockport, you expected those two to be up there. And obviously Mansfield have sort of been in and around there for quite a long time. So I think it was only a matter of time before they were able to crack it. Obviously Crawley was something like out of the blue. But I just look, it's just so tight. It's just so tight in there. And obviously, I mean, that top 3 and of course that playoff spot, I mean, we currently occupy it. Crewe are just outside after beating us last night, which was far from ideal. Colchester are still alive. Look, at Chesterfield, I think I certainly want to keep an eye on as well. 5 wins out of their last 6, which included a draw in there as well. So that, they're starting to hit form at the right time with some somewhat favourable games to come. You have mentioned the games that you've got yet to come already. As you mentioned, you go to Cheltenham next, and you're coming up against the likes of basically Wimbledon, Salford, Tranmere, Colchester, and then those last 2 games against Bradford and against Notts County. So they're by no means the easiest set of fixtures. I mean, you do look. I mean, pretty much all those teams, barring Cheltenham, there's still some glimmer of hope for Salford. They're all playing for something. And it could be a dangerous, and they're dangerous games, those ones.
Yeah, and it's hard at this minute to know how it will all pan out, in a sense. Obviously, like you said, those last 3 games, because up to recently, you thought Colchester were probably the form team, Bradford were probably one of the form teams, and then Notts County had just gone on a run, and then Colchester have just dipped a bit, Bradford have just dipped. So it's almost, I do think it'll go to that last game for a lot of teams. Like you say, you've got Wimbledon, but also it will depend on, like with Salford, if they lose, say, the next game and the other teams in the playoffs win, suddenly, I wouldn't say they're out of it, but then they've almost got to beat us. And then that actually makes it not easier, but do you know what I mean? If teams like last night, I think Walsall, I don't think they played for a draw, but they knew that the draw was okay. So it almost makes it harder, doesn't it, in a game? Or even like Saturday, it will be like we're expected to beat Cheltenham, but they've got nothing to play for. They've had 2 sort of shocking results, and that can be dangerous, just because, like Barrow sort of went to Wimbledon and drew, and then went to Port Vale and won. I mean, Barrow at home looks if you could handpick a game, that's who you'd pick, isn't it, at the minute? Because you're thinking they've got nothing to play for. I know they've got a new manager, but ideal sort of game, and yet they went and took 4 points off 2 of the better teams. So, like I say, it's a hard division to judge, and like I said with Bradford, I didn't think a lot to them, but we did play really well that day. And sometimes Bradford are one of the teams I haven't seen a huge amount of, but I've watched a couple of the games recently and thought I can't see how they've been on such a good run, but they are, and they've been winning a lot of games, so they've obviously got something about them. But then you watch and you think, like I said, they didn't score against Accrington, they didn't score against Tranmere at home, and you think, well, maybe they're sort of waning a bit, but then they put 4 past Colchester. So I think there's a lot of, like you say, similar teams, but also I appreciate you can only judge what you see, and if you only watch your own team against the other team, like so, I'm probably sad enough to watch. Like I'd much rather watch a League Two game. So like I'll put one on, ahead of the Premier League or whatever if there's one on. So I do feel like I've seen quite a lot of teams a lot of times, and like I said about Fleetwood earlier, I was probably doing them a bit of a disservice. They actually played some good football. But they were just like almost ideal opposition at the time because they were defensively quite weak. But then they've been on a bit of a spree recently, and I think, like with them, you'd think they've gone from looking like, oh, that's a team you'd want to play, to hang on, are they eyeing up like a late playoff charge, and they can be dangerous. So I think it is genuinely a division where whoever you play, anyone, I know it's anyone can beat anyone, but I think we're genuinely capable of beating every other team, which I didn't think last season. But equally, every other team's capable of beating us. So if you're not quite on it, then it doesn't matter who you're playing, because all these games take a very similar path. But there's very little logic to it. Like we had about 105 minutes at Bromley with 10 minutes of stoppage time, where I think they had something stapled to the front of the goal, and it was like hitting it and coming back out, because I'm fairly sure we scored about 5 or 6 and didn't score one. Then in the next game, Broadbent kicks it upfield, Street smacks it in, and we scored after 18 seconds. And you're thinking, well, we've just toiled for 105 minutes, and then we've scored within the first 15 seconds. But that kind of sums it up, really. Like the next game starts totally fresh. So you can win 5-0, and then the next game you go 1-0 down early, and it becomes a real struggle and battle, because every team is sort of, I don't think I've seen a team that's uncompetitive. Like Carlisle, when we went there and they were in a bit of turmoil, like we drew 0-0 there, and they had like 2 or 3 really good chances in stoppage time. You're thinking, well, we could easily have lost that. So, like you say, it's going to be interesting, but I think that it's so close that, like you say, you look at it 1 minute and think, hang on, we could be dropping out the top 7. The next minute you're in the top 3. Like you say, it's almost where the music stops, unless I just can't see it. Like I was going to say, if Walsall and Port Vale go on a good run, but they're playing each other on Saturday, so straight away that's another game where someone's dropping points. So yeah. I don't see a scenario where 3 teams are going to win. This will probably happen now, but 5 or 6, it's not going to happen. I don't think it can with the fixtures, to be honest.
Yeah, perfectly agree. Just to, obviously, we'll wrap it up in a minute, but obviously, and we thank you for coming on. Just to, obviously, just going back from more of a Doncaster perspective, I know you've got players there that can easily hurt teams. I mean, you easily look at someone like Luke Molyneux, who would probably walk into any League Two team. Let's be honest. The quality that he possesses. What sort of what players are you sort of obviously looking at in these next few to get you those points and get you those results? I mean, Molyneux will obviously a big one. Have you got any injuries as well? Have you got like any concerns at the minute with a few? Is there anyone in which you're worried about or anything like that heading into obviously the biggest part of the season, really?
Yeah, I mean, I keep going back. That Bromley game stuffed us from a couple of angles, because not only did we lose, I've never seen this before, but the whole back 4 actually had to go off injured. And 3 of them are still out now. So, yeah, to lose an entire back four in one game, I think we ended up with about 9 attackers on in the end because of the nature of the game. But I think Joseph Oloru's out for the season, which is a big loss. But hopefully Joe McGrath is coming back. I think Anderson and Wood were that partnership that got us on that run last season. But they're both obviously what they've got in experience. They sort of lack in pace. So I think when they play together, like last night wasn't too bad because Walsall had 2 big physical strikers. If you play teams that have got a bit of pace, McGrath and Oliver have been a really good partnership. So I think if we can get McGrath back, but yeah, it's been interesting. We've had people like Molyneux have been obviously really good. Street on loan's been a really good signing from Lincoln. He's scored goals. He's ended up leading the line. Ironside's been out the last couple of games with an injury, but he should be coming back. So we've actually had quite a few people who've really stepped up. George Broadbent in the middle of midfield. It's kind of gone from sort of not even getting a look in last season to one of the first names on the team sheet. I think Owen Bailey's played every minute again in midfield. We've just had like similar issues all the way through, like the sort of second number 8 / number 10. Like Clifton's played a fair bit, but he's been in and out. Sabara's been in and out. Kelly, our loan, he's been in and out a little bit. And then defensively, we've had to make quite a few changes. But I think one positive in the last few games is, like you say, Molyneux's always consistent. Gibson's found some real form on the other side. Street's done really well through the middle. And then Billy Sharp, these last couple of games, he's looked really sort of back to his best. He's not started, I think it's for about 12 or 13 games. So, you know, that's not been ideal for him at this point of the season. Him and Ironside had shared the load for the first half of the season. But then since Street's come in, he's kind of been first choice and scoring quite a lot of goals. But I think obviously Sharp is experienced enough to know the pressures of being a striker. But it's like last night, he gets that 1/2 chance and he's expected to take it. But when you've not been starting games, I always think it's really difficult. And lots of strikers in League Two, how many chances do you need to score? You know, it's not one, is it? Often. But he has showed, like these last couple of games, he's had an assist, a goal. He had one ruled out for offside last night that looked quite close. So I think if we get him, you know, if he gets on a little run, Ironside coming back, you know, the wide players have been firing. I think we have got those forward players that can hurt teams. And I think depends how brave McCann wants to be, I guess. But I think our sort of better sort of performances recently has been when he's almost, and we've been behind a couple of times, so it's a bit easier to do it, but he's just gone for it really. And he's gone with 2 strikers, sometimes 3, sometimes like almost 6 or 7 attackers on the pitch in a formation. And it's like on Saturday, do we just go to Cheltenham and think, let's try and give them a drubbing, if you like? And although no game's easy, like just go for it and don't go there with any fear, or just take it on. Like Wimbledon the week after, can we play it as like a, come on, these are vulnerable at the minute, let's just try and beat them, rather than it being, with all due respect, a Wimbledon type game, which is they try and keep a clean sheet, Stevens gets a goal, they try and win 1-0. Like last night, it sort of caught up with them a little bit, that approach. But there are times you're watching them and thinking it's like trying to get through a brick wall. So do you just throw caution to the wind and go, let's have a real go, and try to win all these games? And the only thing with that is, if you do lose, like last night, if we'd have lost, we probably couldn't have caught Walsall. But we gave it a real go and we just fell short. I think that's fine. Like if that happens, But it's really hard, isn't it, to go? It's like last night. Now you look at the game and think, oh, you'd have taken a draw now. But before the game, you're probably thinking, and David Artell's probably one of their managers who's prepared to try to win every game rather than, well, obviously you don't play for draws because you haven't drawn, have you, really? But like now you look back and think, oh, 0-0 would have done. But actually, if you'd have won 2-0, you'd have took another big step. You'd have actually been close to a top 3, wouldn't you? So I think I'd rather fail in an attacking manner than trying to just sort of bundle your way through. Because if we do get in the playoffs, we are going to need some sort of not necessarily momentum. I think last year that probably went against us because it was almost like we were a runaway train. So as soon as we come off the tracks, we literally came off the track. But I think if you're going into the playoffs with like 5 draws out of 6 games or whatever, it's not really the sort of form that's going to get you up, is it? So, and we're going to play, if we get in the playoffs, we're going to play some of these teams that we're playing over the next few weeks anyway. And like I said, the nature of the division, every game is like tight and like psychological battles. And like, I'm almost thinking you just beyond that and just think whether it's Wimbledon, Walsall, Carlisle, just we've got enough attacking players to just play on the front foot, and we've got a lot of defensive injuries, so it makes sense to actually just sort of go for the jugular a little bit. And like last night, looking back now, it's can you get that third goal? I know the natural thing is if you don't concede, you win 2-1, but then you sit back and they're whacking it long and it's bouncing up and it's second balls and something drops in the end and you think, well, it takes a lot of bravery, but are you better to just kind of live and die by the sword, if you like? But I appreciate there's a lot of money and livelihoods on the line, and it's easier for me to say that sitting here than it might be, like I say, that point last night might be the one that gets us in the top 3 overall. But we're only going to know at the end. So I think it's something I'm excited by, though. I know a lot of people last night on social media were like, oh, I'm sick, I feel sick and nervous. And I was like, I didn't feel that at all. I thought it was a good game. And I'd have rather won, obviously, and it'd be a terrible game. But there's still 7 to go. So it's one game at a time. Try to win as many points as you can. And I think that's been our strength so far. We've not I think McCann's managed to keep people focused, and certainly every player that's interviewed says the same sort of things, and I think they genuinely mean it. They're not actually sort of eyeing up League One as such. They're just looking to win the next game and seeing where it takes us. But there'll be twists and turns, won't they, I think? And I still think, like you said, there could be a team could still really come up on the rails. Probably not to get in the top 3 because I think there's too many games between each other. I think it will be 3 from the 6 that it's looked most likely. But I still think an outsider could come and nick that playoff spot, or like yourselves could climb close to the top 3. I don't know who it would. I think the problem is, like, you look at it each, like Fleetwood have just won twice away, haven't they, and scored 4, and you think, oh, it might be them, but they'll lose at home to someone with nothing to play for, and that'll be it. But probably Chesterfield of a team, I reckon, might. Since I've moaned at them for playing really well against us twice, maybe we'll probably get them in the playoffs.
Yeah, that's certainly the team I mentioned that I thought keep an eye on them because of their recent one. Because I think, like I say, they won like 5 of the last 6 and they drew the other. they're hitting form at just the right time, in which they're going to give it a go, in which they've been very inconsistent all season. But yeah, I totally agree. There's so many more twists and turns to come, and to be quite honest, I'm looking forward to it ending now, because this has been quite the season for it. Whether we get into the playoffs, I don't know. Injuries are hitting us at the worst possible time. We played yesterday without a single recognised striker fit at the club, so that's always lovely. But look, I perfectly agree. There's so many games between each other that it's sort of hard to sort of say, well, if those teams are going to go on a spectacular, and I'm probably not in those like top 5 or 6 in particular. I'm just not sure about that. But yeah, there's so much more left to play for, and it's just so tight up there, which makes for an exciting end to the for the rest of the season. I think we'll wrap it up there. Thank you, Daniel. God, I can't even speak there. Daniel, thank you so much for coming on, giving us a bit of an insight to Doncaster, and obviously for the rest of League Two. Really do appreciate your time this evening, and of course, thank you to everyone that's listened. Make sure you hit that like button, subscribe if you're new around here. Thank you so much for 850 plus subs on YouTube. Really do appreciate your support. Make sure you go and download the podcast wherever you get your podcasts from. And anything from you, Daniel, before we go? Like anything you want to mention at all? Anything quick?
No, I think we've covered most things, but we'll probably let's hope we're not all back on in the playoffs at the end. But I don't know, you'd probably take that, wouldn't you? But
yeah, absolutely, I would. Thank you so much, mate. And thank you guys for listening. We'll see you on the next one. Take care.